everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Marvel/Godzilla, starting as a level 2 mutant, chapter 80 to 88, 80-12-22 words. The Arctic base had barely been hit, and then the very next moment, the one contact who might have known anything about the main base's location was silenced. Even the smuggling group vanished along with him without a trace. At that moment, even someone as seasoned as Magneto, not to mention Nick Fury, could not help feeling that this was truly difficult. Compared to Stryker, who liked to sabotage people from the shadows, Bolivar was far more cunning and far more ruthless. He was like a venomous snake lurking in the dark. When he did not strike, he remained invisible. But the instant he did, it was always meant to kill. Even though they had moved first this time, they still found themselves constrained at every turn, unable to fully investigate. What's so scary about an enemy like that? Magneto shot to his feet. Charles, tell me where that contact disappeared, and where that smuggling group vanished. I'll investigate personally. I refuse to believe anyone in this world can hide a secret this massive without leaving a single flaw. Even if Bolivar were a god, I'd still drag out his weakness. They disappeared in. Charles named the two locations one after the other. The two places were tens of thousands of kilometers apart. One was in Nunavut in northern Canada. The other lay deep in the Pacific Ocean. So either Bolivar has people in both places, and he carried out his cleanup simultaneously. Or he has some kind of spatial transport method similar to Fenris's, or else an extremely advanced technological method. That would be the only way he could eliminate two exposed threats in such a short amount of time. Professor X shook his head. Whichever possibility it is, none of them are ordinary. You must proceed with caution. Magneto nodded and started to leave. Hold on a moment. Fury suddenly spoke up from the side, stopping Magneto in his tracks. I still have one more lead about Bolivar himself. You may find it more interesting. About Bolivar personally? Fenris asked. The information they currently had on Bolivar, the so-called father of the Sentinels, was already pitifully scarce. How could a man this suspicious and this cautious possibly leave behind extra clues for S to uncover? Fenris, I told you before. There are many things brute force can't solve, but that doesn't mean authority can't. Fury brought out the intelligence he had obtained without any preamble, and displayed it in front of the three of them. Before I became director of S. Peggy Carter was the one handling this sort of matter. Back then, Bolivar was in unusually frequent contact with S, for a period of time, especially in regard to technical exchanges in certain fields. Fury pulled up a dense web of clues, though most of them were only fragments and incomplete records. Although they were later ordered destroyed for certain reasons, bits and pieces like these still couldn't escape me. Technical exchanges. Fenris quickly skimmed through the information, then could not help asking, S actually has technology of its own. Why wouldn't we? Fenris, can you stop being so biased against us? The naked skepticism darkened Fury's expression. Have you ever heard of digital life technology? Digital life technology, as the name suggests, means uploading human self-awareness into a digital world, allowing one's consciousness to survive in another form even after the physical body is completely gone. Bolivar himself was a dwarf. If he managed to master that technology, then the current him may no longer be living in a human form at all. He may have discarded his imperfect flesh and survived instead as a digital life form. Fury explained, that would explain why we know almost nothing about him, and also how he can maintain secrecy on such an absurd level. Of course, this is only a hypothesis. It may not reflect reality. Fury sighed, then added in a half-joking tone, or maybe he got clues from S about the supersoldier serum, and turned himself from a dwarf into a muscle-bound giant like Captain America. Your General Ross spent a lifetime researching the supersoldier serum, and all he got out of it was a big green monster he couldn't even control himself. I don't believe Bolivar would pin his hopes on such a dead end. Fenris flatly rejected Fury's guess, rubbing his chin as he thought. Digital life. The temptation of gaining another form of immortality inside a digital world was simply too great. If such a technology were ever made public, it would drive countless people insane and easily trigger worldwide upheaval. And Fenris had no idea whether S possessed digital life technology or not, but he did know that S old enemy, Hydra, definitely had at least one successful case. Arnim Zola. Could it be that the one conducting technical exchanges with Bolivar wasn't S at all, but Hydra buried inside S? Fenris raised a brow as another possibility suddenly occurred to him. Currently has digital life technology, then? Fenris looked toward Fury. If that kind of technology really existed, then Fury would definitely have been the first one to back up his own consciousness. Fury shook his head with an expression of genuine regret. He clearly found the idea tempting too. Every lead was destroyed. These fragments are the only things I could recover. I've already told you everything. What's the point of overthinking all this digital life nonsense and all these missing clues? If we drag the men out into the open, we'll know everything. Magneto could not sit still any longer. He grabbed Fenris by the arm. Come on, Fenris. We'll go check the place where that contact disappeared first, and then we'll flatten these bases one by one. I refuse to believe Bolivar can keep sitting still after that. Calm down, Eric. Professor X tried to stop him. Charles, they're practically pressing the muzzle of a gun against Mutantkin's forehead already. How am I supposed to stay calm? Magneto let out a cold snort and flicked his hand casually. Fury's holographic projector sparked with a burst of static and immediately died on the spot. Fury had never expected that 1 second they would still be speaking normally, and the next second he would be thrown out. Back in his office, he stared at the black screen with widened eyes. This Magneto is way too realistic. The second I stopped being useful, he turned on me faster than I do. Wait, that's not right. What happened to our information exchange? Fury's mind turned, and suddenly he seemed to realize something. He slapped the desk in frustration. Fenris still hasn't told me the information he promised. Whoosh! The next moment, a dimensional portal opened, and a thin slip of paper was extended through it. Fenris's slightly teasing voice followed. Director Fury, you've got hidden dragons and crouching tigers all around you. You'd better be more careful in the future. Fury froze, not understanding what Fenris meant. He instinctively took the slip of paper. A short line of writing appeared before his eyes. Cut off one head, 2 more shall take its place. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 81, 1335 words. Inside the office. Watching Magneto get ready to rush out the door, Professor X let out a sigh. Don't be hasty, Eric. What I mean is, once I switch to a hover wheelchair, we'll go together. You're going to? Eric looked at Professor X with open suspicion. He missed the old days too, the days when he and his old friend fought side by side. But the enemy they were facing this time was no soft target he could crush at will. Psychic abilities would be of no use at all. The Sentinels countered Professor X even more brutally than they countered him. Bringing Charles along really would not amount to dragging along dead weight. We're only going to look for clues. I know that place better than anyone, and with me there, the search will be much more efficient. Professor X smiled faintly, then glanced at Fenris, who had just returned from Nick Fury's side. More importantly, I'm curious how a living person could simply vanish over there. And if we run into Sentinel robots, I trust Fenris can send me back to the school ahead of time. As long as you don't mind me grabbing the wheelchair and tossing you back directly, I have no objection. Fenris shrugged. The Sentinels were indeed powerful, but not so powerful that he could not even protect Professor X. I have no objection. Just don't use too much force. Professor X made a rare joke. A moment later, under Professor X's guidance, Cyclops successfully pulled up the satellite images of the target location. Fenris gave the photos a quick glance. With a casual wave of his hand, a huge dimensional portal opened. Ever since we got Fenris, the Blackbird gets deployed less and less. Keeping close to Professor X's side, Cyclops followed behind Fenris and stepped through the dimensional portal, speaking with some feeling. It had been a long time since he had flown the Blackbird. Jean was still adjusting to her new powers and was not suited for intense combat. Wolverine, the moment he saw Magneto, had quietly retreated into the distance. Hank was busy researching those Sentinel robots. So Cyclops had naturally taken it upon himself to come along. Besides, Scott's power was equally simple and direct, pure energy output. It was not easily countered by the Sentinels. Be careful. Don't let your guard down. Fenris turned and warned them. Then he stepped forward first, passing directly from the school to a desolate island. It lay in northern Canada, within the Arctic Circle, where the climate was harsh. Looking out across the landscape, there was only emptiness in every direction. Even with Fenris's eyesight, he could only make out the faintest traces of human habitation far, far away. Our target is over there. Professor X had already changed into a wheelchair capable of low-altitude hovering. After briefly orienting himself, he decisively lifted a hand and pointed toward a small rocky hill not far away. That contact was last seen there. These people really were cautious, picking a place like this. After taking in the surroundings, Magneto commented with a sigh. Then he turned his hand and gently lifted all four of them, carrying them toward the hill. Could there be a hidden base underground here too? I don't know. But this was probably just a concealed temporary foothold. I still can't figure out how Bolivar silenced that contact out here. Professor X shook his head, equally puzzled. Magneto's control was steady, and the four of them moved quickly. After only a few breaths, the full outline of the hill gradually came into view. This is... The sight before them made Professor X's expression change at once. It wasn't like this before. The climate here was brutally cold. Day after day, bitter winds eroded the mountain, and layers of ice built up over time, hardening the rock until it was incredibly solid. But now, as if struck by some unknown force, the once hardened hill had been almost completely blasted apart. Broken stones littered the ground in every direction. The hill looked ready to collapse at any moment. From time to time, chunks of stone still tumbled down its slope, striking the ground with sharp, brittle cracks. Fenris instinctively narrowed his eyes, his gaze sweeping across the area again and again. The devastation here stood in stark contrast to the surrounding landscape. Professor, our earlier guess may have been wrong. The four of them landed lightly. Fenris strode forward, picked up a fragment of rock, and examined it for a moment in his hand. This wasn't done by Sentinel robots, and it definitely wasn't the result of a military heavy weapons strike. It looks much more like some kind of high-energy laser weapon directly destroyed the entire hill. And a weapon at that level is something the military's current technology simply could not produce. What do you mean? Leaving Scott to guard Professor X, Magneto walked over to Fenris. He stared at the broken stone for a while, but saw nothing meaningful in it. Before we came here, we all assumed that contact was betrayed by Bolivar after the Arctic base was exposed. But judging from what we see now, this probably wasn't Bolivar's doing. It looks more like another force got involved and intercepted the target before either we or Bolivar could reach him. At that point, Fenris suddenly froze. The images he had glimpsed through Mothra abruptly surged back into his mind. It was in the royal palace of Wakanda, when King T'Chaka had told his son T'Challa that Wakanda had recently captured a smuggling ring trafficking vibranium. And meanwhile, the Sentinel robots were still being continuously refined. Based on the intelligence Magneto had previously obtained, Bolivar had clearly set his sights on vibranium, that miraculous metal, and was trying to replicate its properties in other materials. But vibranium happened to be under Wakanda's strict control. Clearly, driven by completely different motives, This group had drawn the attention of Bolivar, the mutants, and Wakanda all at once. Wakanda had simply moved faster. Before anyone else could act, they had already taken those people back. The effect of the strike was nothing like modern weaponry. And as for the advanced technology needed to cross half the globe in a short time to capture enemies, other than Wakanda, which had devoted itself to staying hidden, there was no one else on Earth at this stage who could do it. Since the location of the main base was top secret, if this so-called contact was also one link in the vibranium smuggling chain, then the truth was already obvious. To conceal the existence of vibranium, they didn't hesitate to blast an entire mountain apart and erase every possible threat at the physical level. No wonder it was Wakanda. Fenris drew a deep breath. The lives or deaths of vibranium smugglers did not matter. But if they wanted to get that contact back, then a trip to Africa had become unavoidable. There's nothing else here worth seeing. Come on, let's go check the place where those smugglers disappeared. If I'm right, then the first enemy we have to face now may not be Bolivar at all. Scott was still using his instruments to gather data from the area, while Magneto and Professor X stood deep in thought. Fenris glanced at them, waved a hand, and opened another dimensional portal, this one leading to a small island in the Pacific. We're leaving already. Scott stopped what he was doing and turned toward Fenris, puzzled. The data collection isn't finished yet. Shouldn't we hand it over to Hank for analysis? By the time Hank gets the results, that contact will already be dead. Fenris stepped forward first and crossed through the dimensional portal. Scott, trust Fenris. We're going. Magneto and Professor X exchanged a look, then followed without hesitation. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 82, 1334 words. Check out my new Pokemon fanfic. Pokemon Adventure, Riding the Hype. PS, is in my second account. On a hidden island in the Pacific. This secluded place, once used by those vibranium smugglers from Wakanda as their final stopover, had now clearly suffered retaliation from vibranium's rightful owners. The already small island had been almost completely swept clean by some kind of high-energy weapon. The beach, the woods, even the river had all lost their original beauty. What remained was utter devastation. The exact same method. 2 long wings beat slowly, leaving beautiful trails of light in the air. Fenris stood beneath the clouds, his powerful vision taking in everything on the ground below. So it really was the Wakandans. Compared to T'Challa, who was far more open-minded, Wakanda under T'Chaka had kept much tighter control over vibranium. And with his belief in eliminating every last root of a problem, his methods were naturally ruthless to the extreme. Charles, can you tell anything? Magneto and Professor X arrived beside Fenris a moment later. After seeing the destruction at the previous site, the three of them were no longer shocked by the wreckage below. Magneto glanced at Fenris's expressionless face, then reached out and poked Charles. All the clues have been destroyed. I can't make anything out. Professor X observed the island carefully for a while, but in the end still shook his head. Unless time itself can be reversed, trying to find useful information in a situation like this is no different from searching for a needle in the ocean. The moment he heard that even Charles was completely at a loss, with no leads whatsoever, Magneto furiously slapped a hand against Charles's wheelchair. In his anger, he crushed a clear handprint into the tough composite material with nothing but his grip strength. Whoever did this, if I find out who it was. Magneto ground his teeth together. Bolivar is lurking in the shadows, eyeing us like a vulture. Mutant kind is hanging by a thread. We finally managed to uncover a few leads, and now someone cuts in halfway through and destroys all our work. Seeing all their previous effort come to nothing, Magneto was overcome with fury, his eyes turning red. The surrounding magnetic field instantly began to surge. The sea below, calm only a moment ago, started churning with waves almost at once. The rising waters rolled outward in wave after wave. A small tsunami was nearly about to take shape. Professor X in his wheelchair and Scott were both on the verge of losing their balance in midair when Fenris suddenly stepped in front of Magneto. "Don't lose your head. I know who intercepted the contact we were looking for." Fenris's words immediately cooled Magneto's anger. His gaze cleared, and he turned at once to look at Fenris with open expectation. Fenris stared straight into Magneto's eyes and spoke each word clearly. Magneto frowned, and the hope in his eyes disappeared instantly. What kind of place was Wakanda? Wakanda was supposed to be nothing more than a backward little farming and herding nation in Africa. Even now, its people supposedly still lived by and burn agriculture. Most of the world did not even know such a place existed. How could a country like that possibly cross tens of thousands of kilometers in such a short time? How could it possibly find these suspects with such precision? Just because the smuggled goods came from Wakanda? Or because they had spears for hunting and farm tools for working the soil? "Fenris, I think panic's getting to you." Magneto let out a sigh. With a turn of his hand, the turbulent magnetic field around them calmed at once, and the waves began to settle. Wakanda may have the motive, but it absolutely does not have the capability. On the map in my study, I'm sure you saw it. Those slippery smugglers circled the Pacific who knows how many times before moving the goods back into the United States. Even if you bundled the CIA, the FBI, and Nick Fury's shield together, they still wouldn't be able to track those people easily. So how could a bunch of Wakandan farmers possibly do it? Shaking his head, Magneto dropped from the sky and began searching the island personally, still trying to find something useful. That left Professor X seated quietly in his wheelchair, motionless, as if thinking deeply about something. "Fenris, that's just how Eric is. Don't take offense." Professor X came back to himself and gave Fenris an apologetic smile. "But he's right about one thing. We really should go back and reconsider our next move." "Professor, I'm not offended. People rarely believe in things that fall outside the bounds of their understanding." Fenris shook his head. A technologically backward farming nation secretly possessing the most advanced science in the world was about as unbelievable as the richest man in the world secretly being a vigilante superhero in the dark, Superman being nothing more than a Kansas farmer, or there always being someone faster than the fastest man alive. "I'm not asking you to accept that reality right now. Today, I only have one question." Fenris glanced at Magneto, who was still anxiously searching below, then fixed his eyes firmly on Professor X. "Believe me or not, we have to go to Wakanda. Every minute we delay lowers the chance that contact is still alive. If I told you I need you to come with me to Africa, where we'll be facing the most technologically advanced nation on Earth, where a major battle could very well break out, and where even the entire X-Men might get dragged in, what would you do?" Silence fell for a moment. Scott's gaze shifted back and forth between the two men, but in the end he said nothing. Magneto's hearing had apparently become sharp enough to catch Fenris's words from far below. He flew straight back up. After a brief hesitation, he took his place quietly at Fenris's side, making his stance clear. "What are you staring at?" Noticing the puzzled look in Fenris's eyes, Magneto suddenly laughed. "I don't believe what you said. But I believe you. The Brotherhood can be here anytime. The most technologically advanced country in the world. Decades ago, I had missiles coming at me by the dozens and I didn't flinch. You think I'm going to start being afraid now?" Fenris twitched at the corner of his mouth. For the first time, he truly felt that Magneto was exactly the kind of man who could own the room. Even when he charged in blindly, he did it without the slightest hesitation. "Scott, tell Ororo and the others to prepare for combat." After less than a second of thought, Professor X's firm voice rang out. "Understood, Professor." Scott nodded and immediately relayed Fenris's words back to the school. "Charles, so you're finally letting go of those pointless principles of yours." Magneto was clearly surprised by Charles's decisiveness, and looked at his old friend with a teasing smile. "You clung to them for decades. What made you willing to put them down now?" Fenris may not have proof, and I may not be able to see what he's thinking, but if you're allowed to trust him, why am I not allowed to support him too? Professor X took a deep breath and slowly opened his eyes. My principles were established for mutant kind. And now, for mutant kind, they can also be set aside. Fenris, are we leaving right now? Fenris looked at the two elders who had chosen to support him without hesitation and smiled faintly. A massive dimensional portal appeared in an instant, passing straight through the four of them. In the next moment, a vast stretch of grassland appeared directly beneath their feet. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 83, 8316:08 words. Burning Zana. As Wakanda's capital and its most developed city, Burning Zana was protected by the Wakandans so thoroughly that it could be called impregnable. With an energy shield covering the entire city, combined with far-reaching optical cloaking technology, there were precious few people on Earth who could even detect the place at all. And as for forces with the means and power to break through its defenses, there were almost none. But today, after who knew how many years, shrill alarms once again rang across the skies over Burning Zana. What's going on? What's happening? Looks like foreign enemies are attacking from the border. They're flying through the air straight toward the capital. What kind of enemy would dare attack Wakanda? No idea. Perhaps it was because peace had lasted too long. Too many years of stability, combined with vibranium and technology far beyond the rest of Earth's era, had caused ordinary Wakandan civilians to lose all sense of crisis. As fighter craft scrambled into the air, most of them did not choose to hide. Instead, relying on the existence of the energy shield, they calmly stood around to watch the excitement. At the same time, in Wakanda's royal palace, inside the council chamber, Wakanda's upper leadership had all gathered. Even Prince T'Challa, who had been in the prison interrogating those vibranium smugglers, had been urgently called over and now sat to one side, quietly preparing to listen in. Taking advantage of the time before the council formally began, King T'Chaka turned his gaze toward T'Challa, who sat quietly nearby. My son, did your interrogation produce anything? No, father. The young T'Challa shook his head and briefly summarized the intelligence he had obtained. This time, we captured 2 groups in total. One of them was already a seasoned vibranium smuggling crew. Those people were easy to interrogate. We barely had to do anything before they started turning on each other and spilling everything themselves. Well done, my son. T'Chaka nodded in satisfaction. What about the other group? It wasn't a group. It was only one man. At the mention of that person, T'Challa frowned, then hesitated before continuing. According to information from our intelligence agency, Pride, he isn't actually a vibranium smuggler. He's just one link in a hidden vibranium smuggling chain. But the information is questionable, and we have no way to verify whether it's true. No matter how you look at him, he seems like an ordinary man. But someone implanted a chip in his brain, and it makes him nearly immune to any interrogation method. Hypnosis and drugs are useless on him. Can't the chip be removed? T'Chaka asked. If we remove it, the man is finished. He might not even survive the attempt. The implantation method was crude, but somehow it's still impossible to solve. T'Challa let out a sigh. To be honest, the moment he was captured, he should already have died. If we hadn't saved him, he never would have lived this long. Father, this man is a major problem. If necessary, we should just get rid of him. Wait until I... Faced with his son's suggestion, T'Chaka hesitated. He was about to say more when the meeting preparations finished. Father and son both turned serious at once. T'Chaka shed the gentle image he wore in front of his son. In an instant, his whole presence sharpened. The aura of both King and Black Panther spread from him, and the vast council chamber fell into complete silence. Is the border tribe chief present? Explain exactly what has happened. I'm here. A tall, powerfully built black man stepped forward from one side. He reached into his pouch and tossed out 3 beads. In the next instant, a clear image was projected from them. 5 minutes ago, unusual spatial energy fluctuations suddenly appeared in the skies above Wakanda's border. Immediately afterward, 4 unidentified individuals suddenly appeared in the air over the border and began flying non-stop toward our capital. The image shifted, and everyone in the chamber instinctively turned toward the projection. Above the peaceful grasslands, a huge yellow energy gate suddenly opened without warning. Then 4 people appeared out of thin air from beyond the gate. The one in front stood tall and strikingly handsome. The other 3 were distinctive in their own ways as well. After briefly getting his bearings, the leader pointed directly toward Wakanda's capital. The 4 of them then blurred and shot through the air toward the city at astonishing speed. Flying at that speed without relying on any equipment. That sight immediately set off a round of discussion throughout the chamber, with people whispering among themselves. Could they be those superpowered humans from the outside world? Or some other kind of superhuman? What are they doing in Wakanda? Chaka barked the order with a frown, then turned to the border tribe chief. You didn't try to stop them. After glancing at Chaka, the border tribe chief gave a troubled shake of his head and explained, with the border tribe's strength, there is simply no way for us to deal with these people. How is that possible? Chaka's voice rose sharply, and his displeasure became obvious. Your Majesty, after our investigation, we've already identified several of them. Faced with Chaka's challenge, the chief bitterly froze the image on the faces of the 4 intruders. Your Majesty, with these 2 here, what exactly was the border tribe supposed to do? One was an elderly man in a helmet, his face full of arrogance. The other sat quietly in a wheelchair, looking gentle and kind, with a bald head that stood out sharply in the sunlight. The 2 poles of mutant kind. Professor X and Magneto. The moment he recognized them, Chaka shot to his feet from the throne. Why would they come to Wakanda of all places? Hear my orders. Raise the alert to level 1. Increase the energy shield's defensive output to maximum. Order all personnel and all aircraft not to leave the shield by a single step. Activate every magnetic distortion device around the capital. Set their output to maximum as well. They came prepared, and they most likely mean trouble. Everyone arm yourselves and prepare to face the enemy with me. A rapid string of orders poured from Chaka's mouth. At this moment, his expression was graver than ever before. It was as if those 2 men were more terrifying than all the other forces on Earth combined. Faced with these 2 powerful mutants whose reputations were known worldwide, no one present raised any objection. They simply obeyed the king's commands in silence. At the same time, in the skies above Bernin Zana, Wakanda's capital, Fenris hovered nearly 300 feet in the air, luminous wings spread behind him, gently beating as he stood motionless above the city. At his side, Magneto floated in the air with Professor X and Cyclops. None of them made any effort to hide themselves. They completely ignored Wakanda's air defense systems and openly stood above the nation's capital, looking down from the sky. Fenris, just as you said, this Wakanda is anything but simple. Flying all the way here from the border, Wakanda's land had looked peaceful and tranquil on the surface. But in truth, Magneto had already sensed the faint aura of hidden danger beneath it all. Even the mountain forest directly below them looked ordinary at first glance. But with the slightest effort of perception, Magneto could detect the enticing scent of hidden metal buried within it. Trusting Fenris really was the right call. Scott, beside him, looked full of amazement, equally impressed by Fenris's sharp instincts. Without him, how hard would it have been for them to set their sights on Wakanda? More than 10 times harder would not even begin to cover it. Just luck. Fenris lowered his eyes and looked down at the mountain forest below. Our guests have already reached the doorstep, and you're still hiding behind tricks. Is this Wakanda's idea of hospitality? A booming voice rang out at once, passing straight through the energy shield the Wakandans were so proud of and into the ears of every single person in the capital. Are they? On the ground, countless Wakandans craned their heads upward and stared at Fenris in the sky. His enormous, dazzling wings shone brilliantly, and the golden sunlight poured down over him, outlining him in radiant gold. In the instant after his voice spread, under the gaze of hundreds of thousands of people, the light around Fenris suddenly blazed even brighter. Without the slightest pause, brilliant radiance erupted. It transformed into a powerful shockwave and slammed fiercely into the energy shield. A thunderous impact echoed out. Under the force of the blow, the energy shield trembled violently. Ripples spread across its surface in layers, and its optical cloaking effect was immediately dispelled. A vast futuristic city gradually unfolded before Fenris and the others. Even though the three beside him had been mentally prepared, the sight was still enough to leave them utterly stunned. Fenris had been right. King of Wakanda, we need to talk. Fenris's expression did not change. He ignored the dense ranks of aircraft on the other side of the shield, as if they were nothing more than insignificant toys. His gaze went straight to the plaza before the royal palace. There a powerfully built man in a Black Panther suit lifted his head, and met Fenris's eyes directly. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on PTR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 84, 13:16 words. The brilliant colors filling the sky gradually faded. As Fenris's figure reappeared before Chaka, the king, aided by the heightened vision granted by the heart-shaped herb, clearly saw the indifference in the other man's eyes. Every single aircraft in the sky possessed enough power to casually wipe out a mid-sized nation, yet in Fenris's eyes, they all seemed beneath notice. What do we do? Chala, along with the royal guard around him, had all gone rigid with tension. They knew better than anyone how strong the energy shield was. But the destructive force their opponent had just unleashed with the simplest of motions had still shaken them badly. Do not speak. Chaka slowly removed the helmet of his Black Panther suit. At this moment, the eyes of hundreds of thousands of citizens were fixed on him alone. As king, Chaka straightened his spine, and his resolute voice rang out through the amplification system. When friends come from afar, Wakanda should naturally welcome them with warmth. But the four of you forced your way in from Wakanda's border all the way here, and now you float above the skies of our capital, openly provoking Wakanda's authority and trampling on our dignity. That is not how friends conduct themselves. Wakanda has remained apart from the world for generations, but we are no soft target for others to bully at will. If you intend to stand above the people of Wakanda, and do as you please, then I fear you have chosen the wrong people. Chaka's forceful words carried cleanly into the ears of the Wakandan people. At once, throughout Burning Zana, the looks the ordinary citizens cast toward Fenris and the others changed. The morale that had been faltering suddenly surged back to life. That's right. Wakanda cannot be defeated. Even if they really are gods descended from heaven, the people of Wakanda will never kneel. What is there to fear? Have you ever seen a god in a wheelchair? Wakanda forever. Seeing the momentum shift, Chaka immediately raised his arm and shouted with them. Wakanda forever. Hundreds of thousands of voices roared as one. The overwhelming cry rolled like a tidal wave, shaking the surrounding forests, while hundreds of aircraft tilted upward in unison and aimed the weapons beneath their hulls at Fenris and the others. Looking at the furious crowd below as the endless swell of voices crashed upward, Magneto frowned. An invisible force field spread out at once, cutting the sound waves off outside it. Professor, did you find him? As though the protests and rising fury below simply did not exist, Fenris turned his head slightly and looked toward Professor X. I found him. The man we want is in an isolated prison below, and he's still alive. Professor X opened his eyes, the worry in his brow finally easing. He deliberately emphasized the last words. Very much alive. Now that they had found the key informant, it would not be long before Bolivar's main base could no longer remain hidden. That's excellent. With a mountain lifted off his chest, Magneto let out a breath of relief as well. Bolivar, who had gone to such lengths to hide himself in the shadows, was certainly dangerous. But the moment he was dragged out into the open, the threat he posed to mutants would drop sharply. Now that we know he's somewhere in the city below, this becomes much easier. As for Wakanda, sensing the extraordinarily active magnetic field around them, Magneto let the protective force field fall away. Unlike Fenris's booming voice, Magneto's voice was magnified layer by layer the moment it left his mouth until it became thunderous, easily drowning out the voices of the hundreds of thousands below. We have no desire to go to war with Wakanda, but... Magneto paused deliberately. Only after the noise below gradually died down did he continue. Today, Wakanda captured two groups of people who are very important to us. King of Wakanda, I know you understand exactly who I'm talking about. Hand those people over to us, and we will leave immediately. We will not violate even an inch of Wakandan territory. But if you refuse... As he spoke, Magneto slowly raised a hand. Then don't blame us for what happens next. In the next instant, a powerful magnetic surge spread out in all directions from deep beneath Wakanda itself. The magnetic shielding devices Chaka had ordered activated turned into useless scrap almost immediately. Before the Wakandans even realized what had happened, the entire city of Burning Zana had fallen under Magneto's control. Every defensive measure lay exposed before him, stripped bare and plainly visible. Wakanda's entire technological civilization had been built on the foundation of vibranium. Against a civilization like this, the current Magneto could deal with it almost effortlessly. So that's what you came for. Chaka immediately thought of the unidentified M'Challa had mentioned, the one with the chip implanted in his brain. But he was the king. He held the fate of Wakanda in his hands. As the ruler of the most powerful nation in the world, was he really supposed to hand over a man just because Magneto demanded it, while hundreds of thousands of his citizens watched? If the moment Magneto opened his mouth he casually surrendered criminals who had smuggled away Wakanda's lifeblood, then where would that leave his authority as the current Black Panther? He possessed the most advanced technology in the world, with 1 million citizens standing behind him. And the other side had only 4 people. Feeling countless expectant eyes on him, Chaka slowly held the Black Panther helmet against his chest and declared in a righteous voice, Magneto, Wakanda does not yield to threats. We do not have the people you are looking for. You have come to the wrong place. Leave now, and there is still room between us for peace. But if you insist on invading and bringing war to our land, then as king, I am willing to defend every inch of Wakanda with my life. Wakanda forever. Eric, you were too impulsive. You should not have threatened their king so aggressively in front of all his people. Hearing the overwhelming roar rise up once again from below, Professor X let out a sigh. Charles, Bolivar's bullet is practically already against Mutantkin's forehead. The only lead we have is in the hands of these idiots who can't understand plain speech, and you're telling me I was too aggressive. Magneto turned his head in disbelief. He had never expected that at a moment this critical, with life and death hanging in the balance, his old friend would still criticize him from the enemy's side. Why waste words on these people? Tear this Black Panther's head off, and what person in Wakanda won't we be able to grab then? Even Scott had begun to lose patience from the noise. Without realizing it, his right hand had already come to rest on his ruby quartz visor. Fenris said nothing from the side. His eyes were fixed tightly on the space behind Chaka, where a string of sparks had already begun to flicker into existence. The moment Wakanda made the first move, he could seize their king by the throat and hold him up in front of the guns of their own aircraft in the very next second. I think you've misunderstood what I meant. Professor X slowly exhaled, then lightly pressed his index and middle fingers to his temple. A vast psychic force radiated outward from his mind in absolute silence, sweeping across all of Burning Zana in an instant. Lower the energy shield. Put down your weapons. Let us in. We are not your enemies. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 85, 85-12-45 words. Lower the shield. Inside Wakanda's Central Control Center, the eyes of the highest-ranking military officer instantly turned vacant. He slowly walked to the control console. After completing a series of complex verifications, he connected to Chaka's communications channel. Your Majesty, request permission to lower the energy shield. Permission granted. Chaka's voice came through the communicator. Very soon, a long string of complicated commands was issued and entered into the control center. Bzzzzzzz, a series of low hums rose from beneath Burning Zana. In the next moment, the blue energy shield began flashing rapidly, pulsing with high-frequency blue light before the glow finally went dark. For the first time in untold years, the energy shield that had protected Wakanda's capital slowly dispersed. The barrier standing before Fenris and the others dimmed little by little, then vanished completely. All soldiers, stand down. Lower your weapons. To all citizens, return home. This is only a joint exercise. Your king has seen your fighting spirit and your determination to resist. Wakanda is proud of you. Wave after wave of psychic force radiated outward from Professor X, spreading endlessly into the surrounding area. Immediately afterward, all the aircraft around them almost simultaneously retracted their mounted weapons, turned in perfect unison, and flew straight back toward their military bases. On the ground, every warrior gripping a weapon suddenly showed a flicker of confusion on their face, only for it to be replaced by a deeply satisfied smile. They marched away in orderly formation and returned to their barracks as well. The people of the capital, who had just moments ago been burning with righteous anger, now seemed as though they had been granted some supreme honor. They all puffed out their chests with pride and began dispersing in twos and threes like a receding tide. Very soon, everything in Burning Zana returned to normal, as if Fenris and the others had never come at all. 1 second earlier, the whole city had been united in resisting a foreign enemy. The next second, the bustling capital looked as lively and prosperous as ever. Charles, you. Magneto stared in open shock as King Chaka, who had just been ready to lead his people in a desperate stand against them, personally gave the order to disarm, while the rest of Wakanda's leadership stood there in a daze as though they all accepted it by default. Everything that had just happened felt like an illusion. The four of them were still standing there high in the sky, while everyone below acted as though they could not see them at all. Aside from the royal guard inside Wakanda's palace, who still maintained a vigilant posture, no one knew that only a second ago their king had been preparing to make a last stand against a terrifying enemy. Eric, I told you. You were being a little too extreme. Professor X slowly withdrew his psychic power. We're only here to get a person back. There's no need to cause unnecessary casualties, much less start a life-and-death war with a country this advanced. If I hadn't stopped things, were you planning to flip this entire city upside down? Isn't this much better? Magneto stared at Professor X in disbelief. Charles's expression was calm, almost harmless, and for the first time in his life Magneto felt like he had never truly understood this old friend of his. If you could do this all along, then why the hell did we bother making such a huge show of coming here and announcing ourselves? Magneto finally unclenched his fist and released his control over the magnetic fields across all of Wakanda. For all these years, he had long since accepted Charles's rigidity and stubbornness as a given. Yet when mutant kind truly faced a crisis, Charles was apparently capable of doing things with even fewer scruples than he was. Influencing hundreds of thousands of people in an instant and effortlessly collapsing the defenses of a powerful nation like Wakanda, all without even using Cerebro. Extraordinary situations call for extraordinary measures. But I will not help you fight humanity. Professor X could tell at a glance what Magneto was thinking. Mutants and humans must coexist for mutual benefit. That is the bottom line. I'm never trusting your so-called bottom line again, Charles. Magneto gave Professor X a long look. Humanity should count itself lucky you're not me. That is precisely the difference between us. Professor X spoke calmly. Let's go have a proper talk with this brave king. Magneto clicked his tongue and slowly lowered himself and Scott down from the air. As for Fenris, he had left the sky the moment the shield came down. In the short time the two old friends had been talking, he had already inspected the entire Wakandan palace from top to bottom. The Titan Index hasn't reacted in ages, but now it's stirring again. The moment Wakanda's energy shield vanished, Fenris felt a tremor in his chest. Deep within his consciousness, the Titan Index quivered faintly, and a mysterious sense of resonance began emanating from somewhere beneath the Wakandan palace. Unlike the clear guidance Mothra had given him last time, this sensation was far vaguer and far weaker. Maybe it's because of the distance. Fenris quickly formed a guess. Or maybe this Titan just isn't as powerful as Mothra was. Beneath the Wakandan palace, Fenris closed his eyes, sending out the special life sense of a Titan beast down into the earth below. That's Wakanda's research center and... A massive meteorite, glowing with a soft and lustrous radiance, suddenly entered Fenris's perception. His eyes snapped open at once. Vibranium. What Titan's power would have anything to do with vibranium? Fenris, stop spacing out. Get over here. In the distance, Magneto's voice snapped Fenris out of his thoughts. Seeing that Professor X and the other two had already arrived in front of the palace, Fenris hesitated for a moment. Then his figure flashed, and he reappeared beside Magneto. Did you find something? Magneto asked curiously. After the last few operations, his trust in Fenris had already reached its peak. Whether it was Fenris's fighting power or his powers of perception, both had filled Magneto with admiration and relief. It has nothing to do with the Sentinels. It's just a kind of instinct I have. Thinking about the faint connection between this new perception and vibranium, Fenris decided Magneto might be able to help. So he spoke plainly. If my instincts are right, then something here in Wakanda should be able to make me a little stronger. As expected, the moment Magneto heard that, his spirits lifted at once. You're already this strong, and you can still get stronger. You can get stronger just by reading a book. Why can't I? Fenris curled his lip. Once Charles starts negotiating with them, I'll come with you. Magneto lowered his voice as he spoke. The stronger Fenris became, the easier their fight against the Sentinels would be. Right now, in this whole city, other than Charles, I'm the one who knows this place best. I guarantee we can move around inside however we like and never get caught. Magneto thumped his own chest. Trust me. Fenris's eyes lit up. That was exactly what he had been waiting to hear. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 86, 2,457 words. In the heart of Bernin Zana, inside the Wakandan royal palace. Within the vast council hall, the leaders of every Wakandan tribe had gathered in short order. Even the members of the council had all assembled, a rare sight in itself. But it was as if they had all agreed beforehand. Every one of them sat there in total silence, eyes lowered, faces composed, even their breathing unusually careful and restrained. Honored guests, please take the seats of honor. King Chaka sat high upon the throne, though half his body seemed ready to spring off it at any moment. On his dark face was a stiff smile he had not worn in a very long time. At the most honored seats in Wakanda's order of hospitality, Professor X sat in front with Scott beside him. Fenris and Magneto, meanwhile, were whispering to each other under the watchful gaze of the entire chamber, acting as though no one else were present. Your Majesty, King of Wakanda, we are deeply honored by such generous courtesy from your nation. Faced with Chaka's reception, Professor X inclined his head slightly. There was not the slightest trace left of the domineering figure who had, only moments ago, dismantled an entire nation's military power single-handedly. His words were gentle and courteous, and every gesture carried the elegance and polish of an old North American gentleman of standing. On behalf of the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants, we extend our greetings to King Chaka and to all of Wakanda. We wish your nation ever greater prosperity, and your people better and better lives. Thank you for your blessing, Professor Xavier. No matter what else might be said, Chaka had ruled as king for decades. He forced out a smile that was at least reasonably proper. And I likewise wish the mutant people greater prosperity in the years to come. The memory of what had just happened still left lingering fear in his heart. Wakanda's vaunted technology had proven almost meaningless before this mild-looking man. If the man had wanted to, he could have quietly made off with everything Wakanda had built over generations, and turned it all into assets for mutant kind. Chala, go serve tea to our honored guests. The fragrant tea. Chaka turned and instructed his son, bring out Wakanda's finest tea leaves and serve our distinguished guests properly. Yes, father. At one side, Chala rose obediently, picked up a teapot that had already been prepared, and stepped forward. His every movement was impeccably proper. At the same time, he could not help secretly studying these powerful mutants, who could overturn Wakanda with a wave of the hand. His eyes were full of curiosity and awe. Wakanda was not invincible. The outside world truly was more exciting than he had imagined, but also far more dangerous. Thank you. Fenris lifted the tea and took a light sip. The rich aroma rolled across his tongue, and he could not help glancing at Chala, the future Black Panther. A few years from now, the current king, Chaka, would be killed in a bombing at the Sokovia Accords conference, orchestrated by Baron Zemo. And Chala, forced to inherit the throne earlier than expected, would personally take action when Tony Stark and Steve Rogers turned against each other, eventually capturing Zemo alive. The only pity was that this exceptional king, one who believed in openness and exchange, would later die young of illness not long after the Wakandan turmoil set off by Killmonger. Looking at Chala's still youthful face, Fenris slowly withdrew his gaze. As time passed, the Titan Index's resonance was gradually shifting from vague to clear. If Wakanda truly could help push his strength to a higher level, then helping Wakanda save a wise ruler in return might not be a bad trade at all. Please enjoy. Chala's eyes lingered on Fenris for a moment. This young man, who looked even younger than he did, had displayed astonishing power just moments before. Professor Xavier, as king, I now do believe that you came with genuine goodwill. After the formal courtesies were complete, Chaka spoke again and finally steered the conversation back to its true subject. However, as Mr. Lenshare stated, Wakanda captured 2 people today who are very important to you. Chaka paused deliberately. Only after all eyes were on him did he continue. I do not quite understand what you mean. Your Majesty, I know very well how much vibranium means to Wakanda. I also understand your desire to protect yourselves by keeping Wakanda hidden from the eyes of the world. Charles had spent a lifetime dealing with people who said one thing and meant another, especially men like Chaka, politicians long accustomed to power, the sort who never turn back until they hit a wall headfirst. Now that it seemed there was no immediate hostility, and that communication was possible, Chaka had once again put on the posture of a king, as if everything that had happened before could simply be brushed aside. When someone shows mercy, others take advantage. That ugly instinct in human nature showed itself most clearly in politicians. After unleashing his power so openly earlier, and with Mutantkin's crisis hanging over him, Charles seemed to have opened some kind of Pandora's box. He simply spoke without ceremony and tore away Wakanda's last veil. You know perfectly well who we are asking for, and you know exactly where they are. Earlier today, you even had your son Chala interrogate them personally. Chaka, they are only a few people. They are not worth more than Wakanda's thousands of years of history. Letting a little vibranium leak into the outside world will not stop Wakanda from continuing its hidden life. Hand them over to us, and Wakanda will remain the same Wakanda it was before. The moment Charles finished speaking, the entire council chamber fell deathly silent. Not only Fenris, Magneto, and Scott behind Professor X, but even Wakanda's own leadership held their breath in unison. A naked, unmistakable threat. The meaning beneath those words was simple. Hand them over and everyone walks away satisfied, with no harm done. But if they refused, then what had happened earlier would be their fate. If he could dismantle Wakanda's military so easily, then naturally he could dismantle Wakanda itself. Most of the time, Charles preferred to leave both sides with their dignity intact. But when Mutantkin's survival was at stake, if someone refused to behave with dignity, then he would simply help them find it. The professor is especially imposing today. Feeling the frozen atmosphere around them and the fear in everyone's eyes, Scott drew himself up proudly, lifted his chin, and could not stop the smug curve that touched his mouth. I think I prefer Charles like this. Magneto clicked his tongue softly. Professor X had shocked him far too many times today. At this point, he seemed almost like a stranger, to the extent that Magneto could hardly believe this was really his old friend. So Wakanda really has no secrets in front of him. On the other side, Charles's words made Chaka's heart skip a beat. He even knows that much? And was Professor X not supposed to be famous for kindness and restraint? Why did the men before him look so completely different from the rumors? Ha 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 ha. A misunderstanding. Truly, just a misunderstanding. Chaka sat silent for a long moment, then suddenly threw back his head and laughed, the loud hearty sound shattering the near-total stillness in the chamber in an instant. Professor Xavier, please do not take offense. I really did simply fail to remember just now. Chaka slapped the armrest of his throne as though troubled by his own forgetfulness and sighed. I deal with far too many matters every day. But now, I believe I understand exactly who you are asking for. You are right. We did capture several vibranium smugglers. As vibranium is the foundation of Wakanda, these people acted with outrageous audacity, smuggling it without permission. By all rights, I should punish them severely. But compared to the precious friendship between us, what do those people amount to? Nothing worth mentioning. Absolutely nothing. Chaka chuckled. Fortunately, because of his skin tone, the folds forced into his face did not look quite as obvious as they might have otherwise. He gave his son beside him a pat and ordered, Chala, bring those people to our friends. Not one of them is to be left behind. Father, should I bring the unidentified men as well? Chala leaned close to Chaka's ear and asked in a low voice. Of course. Can't you tell? That one is the person they actually want. Faced with his son's question, Chaka gritted his teeth and tried to communicate entirely through his eyes and brows. That man is a hot coal anyway. If they want him, let them have him. We still can't deal with that chip in the short term. These mutants know nothing. How could they possibly handle it? In the end, won't they still have to come back and beg us for help? Yes, father. Chala's eyes lit up at once. His admiration for his father's cunning only grew stronger. As expected of the current Black Panther. Wise and brave, able to think so far ahead in such a short time. Not far away, Fenris caught the silent exchange between father and son and felt his eye twitch despite himself. Was the king of the most technologically advanced nation on Earth truly unaware of what he was doing? Professor X and Magneto beside him looked equally complicated in expression. Only Scott seemed completely oblivious, still holding his chin high with unconcealed pride on his face. Father, I'll go at once. On the other side, Chala, having understood the signal in his father's eyes, pounded his chest firmly. Do not waste our guest's time. Go quickly. Chaka frowned and urged him on loudly. As soon as the order was given, murmurs began to spread throughout the chamber. Wakanda's other high-ranking figures did not know what Chaka was thinking. Many of them did not even know the details of the interrogation. All they knew was that under Chaka's rule, Wakanda had spent decades ruthlessly cracking down on vibranium smuggling, and almost no smuggler who fell into his hands ever met a good end. Yet this time he had chosen to hand them over so easily, directly violating the principle he had always upheld. The surrender of a hardline ruler did not represent only Chaka's personal concession. It represented Wakanda itself yielding ground. Yet at this moment, with so many people present, all of them hesitated and stammered inwardly, and not one dared speak, much less step forward to oppose it. As one, they chose silence, then sat and watched as Chala walked out of the chamber step by step to fetch the prisoners himself. That's it. Magneto sat to one side, taking in the many different expressions around him in a single glance. He curled his lip in disdain and lightly nudged Fenris, who still had his eyes closed in concentration. This is the powerful country you were talking about. The country that supposedly needed the entire X-Men and Brotherhood on standby, the one that could drag us into a brutal battle. I thought they'd have a little more spine than this. Magneto said it cheerfully, making no effort at all to lower his voice. In the council chamber, the mockery sounded especially harsh. The cutting ridicule reached everyone's ears, but Chaka and the others acted as though they had heard nothing at all. While Chala went to fetch the prisoners, they continued exchanging polite conversation with Professor X as if everything were perfectly normal. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost absurdly so. I didn't expect the professor to be willing to act like this either. Besides, no matter how powerful a nation is, it's still run by people, isn't it? Fenris spread his hands. And unless they're facing something like the Sentinels, specifically designed to counter the professor, his abilities are obviously more effective in a situation like this than ours. True enough. Magneto nodded in strong agreement. There was no need for Fenris to say anything else in a setting like this. Once Magneto quieted down, Fenris simply sat where he was and continued extending his perception outward again and again. Found it. After waiting this long, the resonance from the Titan Index suddenly sharpened in his mind without the slightest warning. So sitting here this long wasn't for nothing. The instant he sensed the change, Fenris's spirits leapt. His eyes closed again, and he clearly felt the fatal pull rising from beneath the Wakandan royal palace. You found it. Magneto immediately noticed the shift in Fenris. I meant what I said before. We go together. Fenris opened his eyes. The delight in them was almost impossible to hide. But after a moment's thought, he still turned to Magneto and said, You should stay. I'll feel better with you here protecting the professor. Fair enough. Magneto hesitated briefly, then nodded. Charles did not truly have combat power of his own. If anything went wrong here, it would indeed be safer if Magneto remained. Fenris, you're leaving. Hearing that Fenris intended to step away before the meeting was over, Scott's ears twitched, and he turned at once to ask. Fenris nodded and rose to his feet. Is it dangerous? Scott glanced back at Chaka and the others, then asked with real concern, Do you need my help? If you're worried about me, just say that. Amused, Fenris tugged Scott up with him, then turned to address the professor. Professor, we've got something to take care of. We're stepping out for a bit. I'll leave things here to you and Magneto. All right. Professor X nodded without hesitation. Fenris, I'll be watching you the whole time. Magneto remained seated as steady as a mountain, but a tiny thread of sound slipped directly from his lips into Fenris's ears alone. If you run into trouble, call for me immediately. As he spoke, another powerful wave spread silently in every direction. In no time at all, the entire city had once again fallen under his control without a sound. Magneto's voice was so secretive that even Scott, standing right beside them, noticed nothing. No problem. Fenris replied just as quietly, while giving Magneto a slightly surprised glance. Looks like all that reading hadn't gone to waste. He could even use magnetism to transmit sound now. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 87, 2,516 words. Seeing Fenris and Scott rise and head for the council chamber exit, Chaka quickly called out to his daughter from the throne. A slender black girl rose at once. You will serve as their guide. Show our two friends the civilization and scenery of Wakanda properly. Chaka stressed the point. Make absolutely certain they feel at home. Yes, father. Princess Suri nodded with confidence, then quickly left, hurrying after Fenris and Scott. Professor Xavier, I hope my daughter can act as a guide for your two students. If these outstanding young people can become friends, then perhaps that too can serve as a symbol of the friendship between Wakanda and your people. Chaka turned to Professor X and spoke with a genial smile, laying on the flattery thick. Hypocrite. Faced with Chaka's goodwill, Magneto gave a cold snort from the side. His eyes drifted shut as he placed most of his attention on Fenris instead. I'd like to see exactly how this kid keeps getting stronger. Wakandan Royal Palace. After leaving the council chamber, Scott let out a long breath instead. Professor X's dominance had filled him with pride, and he had thoroughly enjoyed being looked at with awe and reverence. But being stared at by the crowd of oddly dressed people the whole time had still made his skin crawl. Fenris, this country's culture is really weird. That guy with the huge plate in his lip kept staring at me for no reason. Scott's non-stop chatter kept ringing in his ears, but Fenris's attention had already flown elsewhere. A few breaths later, his eyes lit up, and his gaze locked onto a metallic building in the distance. The undisguised brightness in Fenris's eyes made Scott's pupils contract sharply. Fenris, you're not planning to. Don't ask so many questions. Just come with me. The resonance was growing stronger and harder to suppress. In the next instant, layer upon layer of shifting light rippled through the space before them. Without a second thought, Fenris grabbed Scott by the arm and yanked him into the mirror dimension. Where did they go? A few seconds later, Princess Suri appeared where the two of them had just vanished. But the bright corridor was now empty. That's strange. Weren't they just here? Suri looked around in confusion but found nothing. Thinking of her father's instructions, she had no choice but to take off what looked like an ordinary Kimoyo bead from her wrist. Pull up the surveillance footage from here. As both a princess and Wakanda's most gifted scientist, Suri naturally had extremely high clearance. Accessing the palace's security recordings was effortless for her. Soon, the Kimoyo bead lit up, and an exquisite holographic projection appeared in front of her. Through the projection, Fenris and Scott could clearly be seen leaving the council chamber side by side. But not long after, the two of them paused for a few seconds by the corridor window. Then, some inexplicable glow seemed to flare before them, and the footage abruptly blurred for an instant. When everything returned to normal, both of them had vanished completely from the image, leaving no trace behind, as if they had never been there at all. The footage continued to play, and moments later Suri saw herself appear in the recording. Watching two living people disappear right before her eyes, Suri's gaze trembled, and the Kimoyo bead in her hand nearly slipped and fell. Wakanda's palace surveillance system had been personally upgraded and refined by her several times over. A basic malfunction like image distortion should have been impossible. Was someone interfering with the cameras from the shadows? But even if someone was helping them, how did they disappear like that? Invisibility. Are mutant powers really this ridiculous? Do they just completely ignore science? Suri frowned and unconsciously paced over to the very window where Fenris had been standing moments earlier. She replayed the footage several times, but aside from that inexplicable burst of light, she still found nothing. The recording had left behind no usable clues whatsoever. They vanished all of a sudden. So where were they trying to go? Unable to puzzle it out, Suri raised her head absent-mindedly. A sleek fighter craft silently swept through the sky and landed on Bashenga Mountain in the distance. That was the headquarters of Wakanda's scientific division, as well as the primary source of Wakanda's vibranium. At the same time, inside the mirror dimension, Fenris and Scott stood side by side as the ground beneath their feet rose in rolling layers, carrying them rapidly toward distant Bashenga Mountain. A meteorite falling from the sky actually created a country like this. Inside the mirror dimension, Scott could freely take in Wakanda's completely different culture and scenery without restraint. Along the way, this advanced technological nation, blending rugged tradition and civilization, left even someone as widely traveled as him clicking his tongue in wonder. Fenris, how big do you think that meteorite must have been? Millions of years have passed, and they still haven't used it all up. Even now it's still supporting the rapid development of their technology. I don't know either. But we should find out soon enough. Following the pull of the resonance, Fenris picked up speed again. Indestructible and capable of absorbing and storing all kinds of kinetic force, heat, even energy. It may have weaknesses, but they hardly matter. The moment Scott learned of vibranium's miraculous properties, he immediately set his sights on it. The adamantium in Logan's body is indestructible, and we all know exactly how strong that alloy is. Now that we know vibranium exists too, then maybe. If they could bring vibranium back and let Hank study it properly, then with Hank's genius, once their current equipment and suits were upgraded, the X-Men's combat strength and survivability could shoot up by a huge margin. Most importantly, if he had vibranium protecting his whole body, he would never need to fear being caught at close range again. In battle, he could unleash his full power without restraint, without having to worry so much about his own safety. With the Sentinel crisis drawing closer by the day, a material like vibranium appearing before them right now was like aid arriving in a snowstorm. Against Sentinel robots, it could practically be called a strategic asset. Later we can just have Professor X mention it to King Chaka, and ask them to give us a few dozen tons of vibranium. Fenris waved his hand, sounding perfectly matter-of-fact. Good point. Scott nodded in full agreement, completely unaware that outside Wakanda, vibranium was traded by the gram. We're here. While Fenris and Scott chatted off and on, their speed never slowed. By the time their conversation reached that point, they had already arrived at the summit of Bashenga Mountain. An imposing, majestic building stood quietly atop the peak, and not far from it was a passage leading straight into the mountain and deep underground. From time to time, Wakandan aircraft swept in from the horizon and descended precisely into the enormous tunnel. This is the headquarters of Wakanda's scientific division. Most of their vibranium is gathered from here. If nothing unexpected happened, that meteorite should be down below. The surging ground beneath their feet slowly settled. Fenris stood quietly before the massive structure, his emotions roiling. And that giant Black Panther statue we saw earlier is on the mountainside below. It's one of Wakanda's landmark monuments. Let's go in. Perhaps because of their dramatic arrival in Wakanda earlier, the place looked like it had been thrown into chaos. Even after Professor X's psychic suggestion, the crowds and machines moving back and forth were still busily at work. Fenris paid no attention to the futuristic spectacle around him at all. He went straight inside the building first. As Wakanda's scientific center, its security level was no weaker than that of the palace. For an ordinary person to enter, they would have to pass through countless layers of defense and a bewildering array of identity checks. On top of that, the building materials were heavily infused with vibranium. For an outsider, whether infiltration or direct assault, the odds of success were effectively close to zero. But in the mirror dimension, which technology could not detect at all of that tight security was nearly meaningless in Fenris's eyes. He merely moved a thought, and the space around them began to churn and fold. After a dazzling series of changes, the scientific center embodying Wakanda's greatest technological achievements had completely shed its defenses before him. Fenris, if even Wakanda's core territory is this easy for you to come and go from, then with this magic, wouldn't you be able to go anywhere in the world? Scott watched Fenris walk right through the main entrance in broad daylight, while everyone around remained oblivious, and all those powerful devices failed to react at all. After staring for a moment, he hurried after him, full of envy. Earth isn't as simple as you think. Fenris shook his head as though it were nothing worth mentioning. This kind of spell works fine against ordinary people. But if you try using it to slip past the truly powerful, you're just asking to get yourself killed. Scott blinked, only half understanding. To him, people like Fenris, Professor X, and Magneto already stood at the very peak of power. As for the stronger beings Fenris was talking about, Scott could not even begin to imagine them. Fenris had no interest in explaining all that to Scott anyway. As Tony Stark continued changing, the world was growing more dangerous by the day. The gods of myth and legend, the mighty Infinity Stones, the Celestials, Galactus, one by one, all of them would appear in time. And the only thing he could do was keep growing stronger before that age truly arrived, until he became powerful enough to protect himself and the people around him. Wakanda's technology may rely too heavily on vibranium, but it definitely has things worth taking. Following the route Fenris carved through the space ahead of them, the two of them kept descending. Along the way, as he looked at all the advanced technology around them, Fenris rubbed his chin, already thinking about bringing Hank here sometime. The goal was simple: strip this place of all its technological, digest what was useful, and make it his own. As the leader of the X-Men, Scott was staring at all the impressive equipment around him too, practically drooling. With technology like this, the X-Men's strength could rise by several more levels. Meeting Scott's hopeful gaze, Fenris nodded, giving him a definite answer. That's fantastic. Scott's eyes lit up. Their pace was getting faster and faster, but halfway down, Fenris suddenly let out a soft sound of surprise. Scott, wait here for me a moment. I'll be right back. Scott froze for a second. Before he could react, Fenris vanished from sight. With nothing else to do, Scott could only stand there and wait. Fortunately, Fenris did not make him wait long. Soon, Scott saw him reappear carrying several strange plants that glowed with a soft, luminous light. What's that? Scott reached out curiously and touched the flowers. They felt smooth and a faint fragrance clung to them. But aside from glowing, they did not seem particularly special. These aren't just flowers. They're called heart-shaped herbs. They're sacred plants only Wakanda's kings have ever been allowed to use. Fenris carefully stored the heart-shaped herbs away before explaining. After consuming one, the user gains physical abilities, strength, agility, and endurance far beyond normal people. That's the real reason the Black Panther is called Wakanda's protector. Physical abilities far beyond normal people. At those words, Scott's eyes widened instantly, and bright red light flared behind his ruby quartz visor. Fenris thought for a second Scott's power was about to spiral out of control again, and instinctively stepped back. Fenris, you absolutely have to save one heart-shaped herb for me. Scott's voice was trembling slightly as he spoke. His power truly was strong, and its destructive force was terrifying. Under the sustained impact of Cyclops' energy blasts, even something like a Sentinel robot would struggle to withstand that kind of firepower. But his weakness was just as obvious. Restricted by the frailty of his own body, forget someone like Fenris, even a close-range fighter like Toad from the Brotherhood could easily take him down once he got in close. Scott had been troubled by that weakness for years. But the appearance of the heart-shaped herb and vibranium was like a stimulant shot straight into his heart. These two things could almost perfectly make up for his shortcomings, leaving him with no real vulnerabilities left in battle. Don't worry. Everyone will get one. Fenris patted Scott on the shoulder. The heart-shaped herb would do almost nothing for him. But for the other X-Men, it was enormously valuable. Whether it was Aurora or people like Bobby and Pyro, they were all fragile glass cannons. The heart-shaped herb could turn them into real warriors, so that when they faced Sentinel robots in the future, they would not be completely helpless. Though after taking it, they might see the previous Black Panthers. Maybe even Wakanda's Panther God too. Fenris muttered under his breath. Scott was too caught up in his own excitement to hear him clearly. Fenris smiled. Just an old legend. You can treat it like I'm making things up. With that, the two of them set off again. As they continued downward, they completely left the scientific center's area behind and entered an enormous tunnel that seemed to descend without end. Tracks spread out in every direction underground. Trains loaded with vibranium or raced overhead, and from time to time a flying craft swept past the two of them, following the passage deeper underground. There's vibranium everywhere here. Fenris looked around. The vague resonance came from all directions, but one pull among them stood out with striking clarity. The surroundings gradually darkened, yet soft blue light began glowing from the rock walls on every side, faintly outlining an immense shadow in the depths below. The meteorite core, that's it. The instant he saw that shadow, Fenris's heart began pounding violently. At the same time, deep within his consciousness, the Titan index started trembling fiercely, as if some mysterious voice were urgently driving him to touch that enormous vibranium core. "Scott, it's dangerous down there. Wait here for a bit." After a quick warning, Fenris instantly turned into a blur and vanished from Scott's sight. Scott watched him disappear again and frowned. Crack! Just as he was about to crouch down and rest for a moment, a sharp sound like glass breaking suddenly rang out. The crisp fracture made his whole body jolt instinctively. The mirror dimension disappeared. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 88, 1261 words. As the space inside the mirror dimension shattered again and again, Scott was quickly expelled from it and exposed to the real world once more. This place was one of Wakanda's core strongholds, so the level of security here hardly needed to be stated. The instant his figure reappeared, Scott was immediately exposed to Wakanda's surveillance systems. At nearly the same moment, several points of light too faint for the naked eye to track had already landed on his body. "Fenris, don't leave me here." Scott looked like he was on the verge of tears. A spine-chilling sense of danger instantly wrapped around him. Without hesitation, he threw himself to the side, trying to escape the lock-on, but the points of light clung to him like shadows and kept him firmly targeted. A faint sound rang out. Before Scott's hand could even reach his ruby quartz visor, the corner of his eye had already caught several dangerous red flashes lighting up in the distance. "This is bad." Scott's breathing stalled, but in the very next instant, an invisible force field suddenly enveloped him. The high-energy beams shooting in from afar silently dissipated in midair. "Don't be afraid, my boy. You'll be fine." Scott heard the professor's warm voice at his ear. "Eric's force field will keep you from being discovered as well. Fenris is below, at the core of that vibranium meteorite. If you can't get down there, then wait here for him." "Got it, Professor." Learning that Magneto had been keeping watch over both of them the whole time, Scott finally let out a long breath after the scare. Once those words faded, he turned his gaze into the bottomless darkness underground. There an enormous shadow loomed faintly against the glow from the rock walls. Because Mothra's radiant wings were far too conspicuous in a place like this, Fenris had not chosen to fly down after dismissing the mirror dimension. Instead, he dropped straight toward the depths in free fall. But very soon, a familiar force field wrapped around him, and a soft supporting force rose beneath his feet, lowering him gently toward the bottom. "Scott's fine." Though they were separated by dozens of kilometers, Magneto's voice still came through clearly in Fenris's ear. Fenris nodded. His figure wove nimbly through giant rocks and countless twisting crevices. As the traces of Wakandan excavation grew fewer and fewer until they vanished entirely, he kept descending for what felt like an eternity before finally landing lightly on solid ground. Within a vast, empty darkness, the mountain-like meteorite core was already right in front of him. Standing at its base and looking up, Fenris saw that this irregular mass of stone towered at least 50 meters high. Under the dim fluorescence of the surrounding rock walls, it looked especially massive. Deep underground, in this lightless abyss, almost no one could ever have come here. Even the Wakandans themselves had never set foot in this place. So this is the core of the meteorite that fell from the sky millions of years ago. Feeling that unprecedentedly intense summons pulsing through his mind, Fenris stepped forward slowly and laid a hand against the massive stone, which had rested in silence here for untold ages. The instant his hand touched it, the Titan index deep in Fenris's consciousness suddenly exploded with a violent tremor unlike anything before. "What is this?" Fenris froze. He had never seen the Titan index react so abnormally. Before he could make sense of it, a surge of scorching energy burst from the index in the next instant. It flowed through both of Fenris's arms and poured into the vibranium meteorite without restraint. The torrent of heat locked his hands firmly against its surface, binding him to the colossal object as though the two had become one. Time passed second by second. Then, very suddenly, a strange sensation rose in Fenris's heart. In a daze, he felt as though he had become a giant stone drifting endlessly through the stars. He watched his body grow larger over the course of that wandering, though violent impacts sometimes chipped pieces away. Ages turned. After drifting through the boundless universe for countless eons, a beautiful blue planet finally appeared before his eyes. In the end, he failed to escape its gravitational pull. It captured him completely, ending his ancient and endless wandering across the stars. As he tore through the atmosphere, an unknown force suddenly split his body apart into one large fragment, one smaller fragment, and countless scattered shards. The larger fragment crashed toward the continent of Africa like a falling star, while the smaller one plunged into the endless ocean, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only a faint and hazy resonance. For Fenris in this moment, time had lost all meaning. He stood in stillness as he witnessed countless cycles of seasons, the rise and fall of suns and moons. After endless dawns and dusks, a group of dark-skinned tribal ancestors came to his side. Using the vibranium that had scattered from him, these people first gathered into several powerful tribes, then eventually forged a unified nation. Time flowed on. Seas became fields and fields became seas. The rulers of that nation rose and fell again and again, yet Fenris remained standing through the erosion of the ages, unchanged. Then, in the modern era, on a day no different from any other, Fenris saw four figures descend from the sky and overturn this powerful nation with ease. Among them, he saw a face he recognized at once. It was his own. The features that had once been perfectly clear had grown blurred beneath the passage of millions of years. He watched himself appear suddenly in this lightless subterranean abyss, drawing closer step by step as though guided by some special resonance. At last, that hand rested gently upon him. It was as though the ancient toll of a distant bell echoed through his mind. At the instant Fenris's gaze met the meteorites, a million years seemed to pass in the span of a snap of the fingers. Countless ages, changing seasons, and immeasurable memories all converged in that one moment and became whole. That lingering resonance still echoed in his ears. The stream of heat pouring from the Titan index had not stopped. And when Fenris finally opened his eyes again through the haze, the meteorite before him had become something entirely different. Every ridge, every contour, every rise and dip now felt strangely intimate. This object that should have seemed cold and lifeless instead looked, in Fenris's eyes, like another version of himself reflected back at him. It felt as though, with only the slightest summons, this gigantic thing could transform in his hands exactly as he wished, without the least resistance. I understand now. Fenris spoke softly. In that moment, he clearly realized the true meaning behind the Titan index guiding him here. Then, in the next instant, another equally scorching power surged from deep within his own body and poured into the meteorite without reservation. This was Fenris's own power, marked through and through with his imprint. The next second, a nearly imperceptible fracture sounded from within the meteorite. Then came more, one after another, until the breaking sounds grew dense. A faint heartbeat began to spread from inside the meteorite, as though some spiritual, living presence were being born within it. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.